Hello everybody, thank you for joining this session. I'm Simon Sherrington and I lead the GSA's research activity. I'm going to present some of GSA's research on 5G chipsets, devices and networks, giving a view of some of the key trends we're currently seeing in the market. GSA publishes a wide range of research in the form of reports, presentations and databases covering the growth of the LTE and 5G technology ecosystems, and obviously 5G chipsets, devices and networks form an increasingly important part of that. Before I get stuck into the industry statistics, a little bit about the GSA. So the GSA, or the Global Mobile Suppliers Association, is a not-for-profit industry organisation representing companies across the worldwide mobile ecosystem who are engaged in the supply of infrastructure, semiconductors, test equipment, devices, applications and mobile support services. We actively promote the 3GPP technology roadmap, 3G, 4G, 5G, and in the future 6G, and we're a single source of information for industry reports and market intelligence. Our members drive the GSA agenda and define the communications and development strategy for the association. It's been representing the global mobile ecosystem since 1998. GSA now has 8 major industry executive members, shown here on the slide in alphabetical order: Apple, Ericsson, Huawei, Intel, Nokia, Qualcomm, Samsung, and ZTE. And it promotes the roadmap of the 3GPP through regular industry reporting. It includes free industry reports, member versions with extra data and insights, an extensive database platform called Gambod, which has got data on the chipsets, devices and networks I've already mentioned, as well as spectrum assignment worldwide. It's also home to the respected GSA Spectrum Group, with members from around the world, which gets involved in advocacy, education and support on critical issues in relation to spectrum. GSA is also home to a growing number of focused working groups and forum, including the new fixed wireless 4G, 5G fixed wireless access forum, which has now got many members. As the slide on the next slide shows, we've currently got 44 4G, 5G fixed wireless access forum members. The slide gives a bit more background about the GSA. GSA by the numbers, if you like. We produce over 200 reports, papers, presentations or data releases annually. We have users from over 200 countries. In terms of the data we collect, we've catalogued over 20,000 LTE devices, over 1,000 5G devices, and we're tracking over 950 device vendors. We're monitoring more than 1,700 public and private LTE and 5G operators. We're tracking ecosystems for more than 50 LTE spectrum bands and more than 35 5G spectrum bands. And those numbers are growing as regulators make more and more spectrum available for mobile services worldwide. We've got peak speed data for over 330 networks. We've catalogued over 180 5G networks that are now launched. We're tracking spectrum auction plans for over 55 markets. We have data on over 300 LTE and 5G chipsets. We track over 20 network features and 40 device features or capability. And we've got 5G spectrum auction data now in over 50 countries, and that's growing all the time. And that's all from one authoritative source, that's the GSA. Before we get stuck into information about 5G devices, we'd have a quick look at where we're at in terms of 5G in general. 5G is being launched worldwide. 2020 saw the 5G move to center stage with some more launched services from network operators, and 2021 has seen continued growth for 5G infrastructure deployment and service launches, and the charts and statistics here really tell the story. By the end of October 2021, nearly 470 operators in 140 countries or territories were investing in 5G. When we talk about investing in 5G, we're talking about those that are spending to acquire authorizations and licenses to operate, those involved in evaluations and trials, all the way through to those that are deploying networks, running soft launches of infrastructure and providing launched services. Of those, a total of 181 operators in 72 countries or territories had launched one or more 3GPP compliant 5G services. 172 operators in 68 countries or territories had launched 3GPP compliant 5G mobile services, and 65 operators in 36 countries or territories had launched 3GPP compliant 5G fixed wireless access or home broadband or business broadband services, +5 with what we'd describe as soft launches. If we compare that to where we were at the start of the year, when 135 operators had launched a 3GPP compliant 5G service, it's more than a third more. And also, by way of comparison, although there's no exact overlap between the LTE and 5G datasets, it means the equivalent of nearly 23% of all LTE operators have launched 5G. So with that bit of background there, let's start to have a look at what's going on in the device ecosystem. Well, before you can have devices, you need to have chipsets. And there's an increasing choice of chipsets for 5G devices. I'm talking here about modem chipsets, with products commercially available from HiSilicon, Huawei, MediaTek, Qualcomm, Samsung, and Tsinghua Unigroup, or Unisoc, formerly known as Spreadtrum. Others, including Apple, are developing 5G chipsets in-house. We don't track or report on those. We only report on those that are commercially available for third parties. By the end of the third quarter of 2021, GSA had identified 41 commercially available 5G mobile processors and platforms, and 17 commercially available discrete 5G modems from the 5 semiconductor companies mentioned above. In addition, we'd identified 2 pre-commercial 5G modems and 4 pre-commercial 5G processors and platforms. Buoyed by that increasing availability of 5G modem chipsets that they can use, we've seen rapid growth in the number of announced 5G devices. The number of announced devices has now reached 1,115. That's the number in the GSA database, an increase of nearly 19% in the last quarter alone. Of those, more than 2/3, 66.7%, are understood already to be commercially available. And the number of commercial 5G devices has grown by nearly a quarter, 24.2% over the last 3 months, passing 750 for the first time, to reach a total of 755 devices understood to be commercially available. And you can see the speed progression there in those charts. The choice of 5G devices is expanding all the time, both in terms of numbers of different vendors and in terms of different device types. GSA has catalogued 22 form factors or types of 5G device. That includes everything from phones to drones, modules to head-mounted displays, laptops and tablets to robots and hotspots, TVs and cameras. Phones and indoor and outdoor fixed wireless access CPE continue to be the most prevalent 5G devices. GSA is tracking 550 announced 5G phones, and of those, over 490 models are understood to be commercially available. We have catalogued 190 5G fixed wireless access devices, including 116 indoor devices and 74 outdoor devices. And the number of announced 5G fixed wireless access CPE models is up more than 100% in a year, quite an incredible rate of growth. And we believe there are now 90 commercially available 5G fixed wireless access CPE devices. By commercially available, what do we mean? What we mean is available to buy. So in the case of modules, etc., when customers can order them for manufacture in bulk to put into their own equipment. That's also true in the case of phones or tablets, but we often don't get visibility of the point at which they start to be available to operators who might want to pass them on to their customers. We do get visibility of when they become available for consumers and businesses. So the commercial count is likely to be a slight underestimate, in fact. I've already mentioned that there's a wide range of vendors announcing and selling 5G devices. There's really a vibrant 5G supplier ecosystem, as this pie chart shows. This pie chart only shows those vendors for whom we have the most numbers of devices. In fact, we're aware of 165 vendors now that have announced available or forthcoming 5G devices, and over 100 vendors that have launched commercially available devices. So it's tremendous progress within the industry. 48 vendors have now produced or announced plans to produce 5G phones. 38 of those have commercially available 5G phones already. Meanwhile, 68 vendors have now produced or announced plans to launch their own 5G indoor or outdoor fixed wireless access CPE devices, and GSA has identified 39 vendors with devices that are already commercially available. Looking now at spectrum support in 5G chipsets and devices, 49 of the 5G chipsets that we're tracking are now catalogued as supporting 5G services in sub-6 gigahertz spectrum, and 31 are catalogued as supporting 5G services using mmWave spectrum. So you can see there's greater support of sub-6 gigahertz, but the number of chipsets supporting mmWave is growing all the time. Device support, meanwhile, is more focused on sub-6 gigahertz spectrum so far. Availability of information about spectrum support in devices is improving as more devices become commercially available. GSA has identified some spectrum support information for 86.8% of all the announced devices we're tracking, and 83.9% of all announced devices, 5G devices, we have identified as supporting sub-6 gigahertz bands, while 12.6% of the devices we've identified are understood to support mmWave spectrum, and 9.7% of all announced devices are known to support both mmWave and sub-6 gigahertz spectrum bands. Of course, one of the things that's going to be important in the coming year or so is how operators and devices stitch together those sub-6 gigahertz and mmWave bands to create seamless, high-quality experience services for their customers. If we look at the commercially available devices, 91 of the commercially available 5G devices, that's just over 12%, are understood to support services operating in mmWave spectrum at the moment, but over 90%, 90.6% of the commercially available devices are known to support sub-6 gigahertz spectrum. Perhaps unsurprising, given the focus of regulators on releasing C-band spectrum for 5G and the fact that C-band spectrum is most used around the world at the moment in initial 5G deployments, C-band spectrum is most supported in announced 5G devices, closely followed by 2.5 gigahertz. The bands known to be most supported by all announced 5G devices are N78, which is in C-band, N41 at 2.5 gigahertz, and N1 at 2.1 gigahertz. There are now 772 devices identified as supporting band N78, and the number of devices with support for band N41 has passed the 700 mark for the first time to reach 702 devices. Band N1 is supported by 621 devices, while band N77 is not far behind, supported by 589 announced devices. The number of announced devices with support for band N3 has risen to 549 devices, while the number of announced devices with support for bands N28 and N79 are 519 and 463 devices respectively. So you can see there's a good choice of devices when looking at the mainstream bands. GSA is also tracking various capabilities of 5G chipsets and devices, and I've picked out a couple here. Their support for 5G standalone networks and their support for voice over new radio. And you know, the message is here that the devices are ready. GSA's catalogued 49 mobile processors or platforms or discrete modems that have been announced as supporting 5G standalone networks. That's 84.5% of all commercially available 5G chipsets. And with 5G standalone networks just beginning to be launched around the world, GSA is already aware of nearly 595 announced devices with claimed support for 5G standalone, up from just over 400 at the end of March 2021. Of those, 413 devices are already commercially available, up from just over 200. Typically, a software upgrade is required to enable devices that customers already have to take advantage of 5G standalone networks once they're switched on. If we look at those devices, 50% of them are phones, 21% of fixed wireless access CPE models, including indoor and outdoor versions, and 17% of them are modules. You can also see that there are some significant categories in the industrial router gateway bracket, as well as battery-operated hotspots. Looking solely at those devices that are now commercially available, phones account for an even larger proportion at 63.2%, 261 phones, again followed by fixed wireless access CPE, 68 devices, and modules, 54 devices. Those 210 commercially available 5G standalone capable phones represent slightly more than 87% of all announced 5G standalone capable phones that we're aware of. With 5G standalone, voice over new radio, VoNR, will become increasingly important to enable organizations to use voice when they don't have access to non-standalone or 2G, 3G networks. It's particularly the case initially maybe in private networks, but we also see a lot of operators working behind the scenes and publicly to test and trial voice over new radio with commitments to deploy the technology in some form or another. GSA has recorded 37 commercially available chipsets with stated support for voice over new radio, 28 mobile processors or platforms supporting voice over new radio, and 9 discrete modems, beg your pardon. Those chipsets are powering 44 announced devices supporting 5G standalone, 22 of them known to be commercially available, typically in sub-6 gigahertz spectrum. Now, it's impossible to give extended lists of devices and chipsets within this presentation, but data on all those devices and chipsets, including a variety of features they support, the spectrum bands they support, are all available in GSA's Gambord database in a searchable format. So you can really zoom in on the things that you want to analyze. That's the end of my statistical market overview on 5G devices. The research on which this presentation is based is all available to GSA members and associates. Look out for updates to all the 5G statistics before the end of the year. And in the meantime, this is a fast-moving market, so if your company launches 5G chipsets, devices, or networks, or you're in a regulatory organization that's assigning spectrum for operators, please tell us. Email us at research@gsa.com. Thank you for listening.